Imagine standing in the shadow of a towering pyramid, its sides rough and unfinished, the tools of its builders still lying where they were dropped centuries ago. What happened here? Why was this colossal project, a monument meant to last for eternity, left incomplete? The answer isn't just about stones and chisels. It's about the dreams, the struggles, and the untold stories of the people who dared to reshape the world with their bare hands. Across the globe, from the deserts of Egypt to the jungles of Cambodia, ancient engineers left behind a trail of unfinished masterpieces frozen in time, whispering secrets about their creators' ambitions, their failures, and the fragile line between triumph and disaster. These abandoned structures are more than just ruins. They're time capsules capturing moments when history took a different turn. A pharaoh dies too soon, and a pyramid is left half-built. An empire collapses, and a temple's columns stand forever unadorned. A prophecy warns a king, and the world's largest brick stupa is abandoned to the elements. Each of these places holds clues not just about how ancient builders worked, but why they stopped. The cracks in an obelisk, the empty spaces where carvings were meant to be, the walls that simply end. These aren't mistakes, they're evidence of real people facing real challenges, their grand visions interrupted by war, nature, or even their own limits. Today, we're going to explore 26 of these unfinished wonders, each one a puzzle waiting to be solved. We'll walk through quarries where massive stones were left mid-carving, climb the staircases of temples that never saw their final touches, and decipher the hidden messages in blueprints that were never realized. Along the way, you'll discover how these structures reveal the brilliance of ancient engineering, not despite being incomplete, but because of it. When a project is finished, all we see is the polished result. But when it's abandoned, we get something far more valuable, a glimpse into the process, the problem solving, and the humanity behind the marvels. So let's begin this journey into the past, where the unfinished tells the most compelling stories of all. There's something haunting about an unfinished structure, a pyramid with its summit missing, a temple with columns half-carved, a wall that just stops. These places feel alive in a way completed monuments don't, because they capture a moment frozen in motion. Think of it like walking into a workshop where the craftsman has just stepped away. The tools are still warm, the plans are unrolled, and you can almost hear the echoes of voices arguing over how to solve the next problem. That's the magic of these sites. They don't just show us what ancient engineers built, they show us how they thought. Take the way stones were cut. In a finished temple, all you see are smooth surfaces and perfect joints. But in an abandoned quarry or a half-built wall, you can trace every chisel mark, every experimental technique, every correction made when things didn't go as planned. It's like flipping through an engineer's notebook, messy, honest, and full of trial and error. For example, at the unfinished obelisk in Aswan, the cracks in the granite tell us exactly where the workers pushed their limits too far. That's knowledge you'd never get from a polished monument. Then there's the human element. Completed structures often celebrate kings and gods, but unfinished ones reveal the laborers, the artisans, the ordinary people behind the scenes. A sudden halt in construction might mean a pharaoh died, a war broke out, or workers simply walked away after months without pay. At the Pyramid of Neferfer, the hastily repurposed burial chamber suggests a scramble to honor a ruler whose reign ended too soon. These aren't just engineering puzzles, they're snapshots of real lives interrupted. Unfinished sites also expose the fragility of ancient societies. A grand project abandoned mid-construction can signal drought, famine, or political collapse. The crumbling edges of Great Zimbabwe's walls, for instance, hint at a thriving trade network that suddenly unraveled. Unlike ruins worn down by time, these structures were never meant to be seen like this. Their rawness makes them uncanny, almost vulnerable. It's as if we're glimpsing a version of history that was never supposed to survive, and perhaps that's why these places resonate so deeply. They remind us that even the greatest civilizations faced setbacks, that brilliance and ambition often collide with reality. A finished temple might impress us, but an unfinished one makes us wonder, what if the workers had just one more year? What if the king hadn't fallen in battle? What if the crack in the obelisk had been just a little smaller? These structures aren't failures, they're invitations to imagine the alternate paths history might have taken. They prove that the past wasn't some inevitable march of progress, but a series of choices, accidents, and near misses, and that's a story far more compelling than any polished facade. Rising from the desert sands of Abusia, the Pyramid of Neferfer stands as a stark reminder of how quickly the grandest plans can unravel. Unlike its polished neighbors, this pyramid isn't a smooth-sided monument to eternity. It's a frozen moment in time, its rough core exposed like an open wound. When Pharaoh Neferfer died unexpectedly, workers dropped their tools mid-task, leaving behind a structure that tells us more about ancient Egyptian engineering than any finished tomb ever could. Walk around the site today and you'll see something extraordinary: the pyramid's inner skeleton. Without its outer casing stones, the stepped layers of limestone blocks are visible, revealing how builders carefully stacked each level like a colossal puzzle. The ascending corridors meant to lead to the burial chamber stop abruptly, some barely started, others half carved into the bedrock. It's here, in these unfinished passages, that we discover the pyramid's secrets. Chisel marks show where masons adjusted angles on the fly, and grooves in the walls hint at the pulley systems used to haul stone slabs upward. This wasn't just construction, it was problem-solving in real time. But the most fascinating detail isn't in the stones, it's in the hurried adaptations. With no time to complete the pyramid, Neferfer's successors did something ingenious. They transformed the unfinished substructure into a makeshift burial complex, lining the rough chambers with fine limestone and carving sacred texts into walls that were never meant to be seen. This improvisation speaks volumes. Even in crisis, the ancient Egyptians prioritized honoring their rulers' journey to the afterlife over architectural perfection. Nearby, archaeologists found fragments of papyrus worker logs detailing daily progress, supply lists, even complaints about missing materials. These documents are like eavesdropping on a 400-500-year-old construction site. One tablet mentions a shortage of copper chisels, another records the arrival of a new quarry shipment. Pieced together, they reveal a project racing against time, plagued by delays even before the pharaoh's death. What might this pyramid have become? Scattered design sketches suggest a structure nearly as tall as the Pyramid of Menkaure at Giza, with a gleaming white limestone facade. But fate intervened, leaving us with something far more valuable, a rare glimpse into the messy reality behind Egypt's polished monuments. Here, the illusion of seamless divine kingship cracks open, showing us the human hands and the human struggles that shaped history. On the banks of Myanmar's Irrawaddy River, the Mingun Potadorgi rises like a broken dream, a colossal brick stupa frozen in time. King Botapea's vision was audacious, a 150-meter monument meant to dwarf every other structure on Earth. But today, all that remains is the massive base, its sides scarred by earthquakes and its summit forever unrealized. Walking around its perimeter, you can't help but feel the weight of what might have been. The bricks, each hand-fired and carefully laid, stretch upward then stop abruptly, as if the sky itself had forbidden their completion. The story behind this abandonment is shrouded in legend. Some say a royal astrologer warned the king that completing the stupa would bring his downfall. Others whisper of a prophecy predicting the kingdom's collapse if the structure reached its full height. But peel back the myths and a more practical truth emerges. Building something of this scale in the early 19th century wasn't just an engineering challenge, it was a logistical nightmare. The bricks alone, over 100 million of them, required vast amounts of clay, timber for kilns, and labor on an unprecedented scale. Local records hint at shortages, forests stripped bare for fuel, villages emptied of workers, and a treasury strained to its limits. The king's ambition may have simply outpaced his resources, yet, even unfinished, the Mingun Potadorgi is a masterpiece of ingenuity. The brickwork, arranged in precise concentric rings, shows how builders adapted traditional techniques to unprecedented size. Unlike stone monuments which rely on weight and precision, this stupa's design distributed stress across its vast base, a necessity when working with brittle materials. The cracks from the 1839 earthquake reveal both the structure's fragility and its resilience. Whole sections crumbled, yet the core still stands, a testament to the skill of its creators. What's most striking, though, is how the site captures a moment of transition. When Bhattapaya died in 1819, the work stopped almost overnight. Tools were left in place, scaffolding rotted away, and the stupa became a monument not to divine glory, but to human limitation. Today, visitors can see the ramps and earthen mounds used to haul bricks upward, frozen in time, like a paused construction site. It's a rare window into the sweat and strategy behind ancient mega projects, and perhaps that's the true lesson of Mingun, not that the king failed, but that he dared to begin. The stupa's fractured silhouette against the Myanmar skyline isn't a mark of shame. It's a reminder that even the grandest visions must contend with reality. The cracks in the bricks, the unfinished curves, the quiet whispers of prophecy, they all tell a story far more human than any flawless monument ever could. Standing among the ruins of the temple of Zeus at Agrigento, you can almost hear the echoes of hammers and chisels that fell silent over 2,000 years ago. Unlike the pristine temples of Athens, this Sicilian giant was never completed, its columns left half-dressed, their surfaces still rough with the marks of the quarry. These unfinished details aren't flaws, they're a masterclass in how the ancient Greeks built their architectural marvels. Each column, meant to tower over the sacred site, was pieced together like a colossal stone puzzle. The grooves and notches cut into the drums reveal a clever system. Workers would slot wooden beams into these channels, using ropes and pulleys to hoist each segment into place. It's a technique that balanced brute strength with precision, turning back-breaking labor into a carefully choreographed dance. But why was such a grand project abandoned? The temple's story is tangled in the chaos of history. Some point to the Carthaginian invasion of 406 BCE, when Agrigento was sacked and its people enslaved. Imagine the scene, workers fleeing as enemy ships appeared on the horizon, leaving tools mid-stroke and stones half-carved. Others argue the money simply ran out, a reminder that even in antiquity, budgets could make or break a vision. The temple's scale was staggering. Designed to be one of the largest Doric structures ever built, it would have dwarfed even the Parthenon. The surviving column bases, wider than a grown man is tall, hint at the ambition behind it. What makes this site so fascinating isn't just its scale, but its frozen state. Unlike ruins worn down by time, the Temple of Zeus shows us a project caught mid-stride. The column drums still lined up where they were dropped, let us trace the builder's workflow. Some stones bear numbered marks in Greek, like an ancient IKEA manual guiding assembly. Others have trial carvings, artisans practicing flutes or curves before committing to the final cut. This wasn't carelessness, it was a deliberate process of refinement, where every detail was tested before execution. And then there are the clues hidden in the stone itself. The limestone blocks quarried nearby show variations in color and texture. Experts can pinpoint which hillsides they came from, mapping the supply routes that fed the construction. Even the mortar tells a story. Analyses reveal mixtures adjusted for different loads, proving these builders understood material science long before it had a name. The temple's abandonment, whether by war or want, ultimately gives us a gift. Where finished monuments hide their secrets behind polished facades, this skeletal framework lays bare the ingenuity and the humanity of classical engineering. The chisel marks, the numbered stones, the abandoned lifting grooves, they're not just artifacts. They're the fingerprints of the ordinary people who dared to reach for the divine, then vanished into history, leaving their work unfinished but their legacy indelible. Deep in the granite quarries of Aswan, the unfinished obelisk lies like a sleeping giant, a monument that never stood, yet tells one of the most revealing stories of ancient engineering. Imagine a single piece of stone meant to tower over 40 meters tall, weighing as much as 200 elephants. This was no ordinary construction project. It was an audacious attempt to carve perfection directly from the earth itself. The obelisk's creators didn't just shape stone, they attacked an entire bedrock plateau, painstakingly freeing it from the living rock with nothing but copper chisels and dolerite hammers. Walk around the site today and you'll see the struggle frozen in time. The obelisk's underside is still attached to the bedrock, revealing how workers carved downward, creating trenches wide enough for them to stand in as they chiseled. Every surface is covered in marks, not just the clean strokes of finished work, but the frantic scratches of problem solving. Here, a groove cut too deep. There, a corner where the stone began to splinter. Most telling of all is the fatal crack that doomed the project. It snakes diagonally across the upper third like a lightning bolt, a flaw that would have sent the monolith shattering under its own weight if raised. But the real genius of this site isn't in its failure, it's in the recovery attempts. Ancient engineers didn't just abandon the obelisk at the first sign of trouble. They fought to save it. Deep gouges along the crack show where they tried to remove the damaged section, essentially performing stone surgery on a colossal scale. Nearby, smaller abandoned obelisks suggest they were practicing repairs on less critical projects. Even the worker platforms, ramps of compacted rubble still visible along the sides, demonstrate meticulous planning. Teams would have stood on these to reach higher sections, their feet leaving impressions that endure millennia later. What makes this obelisk so extraordinary is how it demystifies the impossible. Egypt's standing obelisks seem like gifts from the gods, flawless, impossibly slender, defying logic. But here we see the sweat behind the wonder. The uneven trench walls prove they worked without laser precision, adjusting angles as they went. Piles of stone fragments still littering the site reveal how much material was wasted in trial and error. This wasn't magic, it was grueling, iterative labor. Perhaps most poignant are the symbolic carvings left behind. At the obelisk's base, faint outlines of hieroglyphs can be seen, likely the beginnings of a dedication to whichever pharaoh commissioned it. These ghostly markings, never filled with pigment, remind us that this wasn't just a construction site. It was meant to be a sacred object, a bridge between earth and sun. That it remained earthbound makes it all the more human. The crack that ended this project may have been a geological accident, but its legacy is anything but. This unfinished giant teaches us that ancient engineers didn't work with supernatural certainty. They pushed boundaries, gambled, sometimes lost, and in doing so, left us something more valuable than another perfect monument. They left us their process, their resilience, and the breathtaking scale of their ambition, carved raw into the living stone. Perched high in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, the Baalbek megaliths defy logic. The Roman temple of Jupiter's foundation rests on 3 stone blocks, each weighing a staggering 800 tons, the heaviest ever moved by human hands. But just a stone's throw away, an even more mind-bending spectacle awaits, the so-called Stone of the Pregnant Woman, a partially quarried monolith tipping the scales at nearly 1,000 tons. Standing beside these behemoths, you're faced with a single, unavoidable question: how? How did ancient engineers even conceive of lifting and transporting stones heavier than 2 fully loaded Boeing 747 jets? The mystery begins in the quarry itself. The stone of the pregnant woman remains half buried, its underside still fused to the bedrock. Chisel marks crisscross its surface, showing how workers painstakingly carved it free from below, a technique requiring precise knowledge of fracture lines and leverage. But the real puzzle lies in what happened next. Transporting these blocks would have required moving them over half a mile to the temple site, across uneven terrain. Modern engineers have theorized everything from colossal wooden rollers to intricate systems of levers and counterweights. Yet even with today's technology, replicating this feat would push our limits. Some believe the Romans inherited even older secrets. Beneath the Temple of Jupiter's Roman-era stones lie megalithic foundations that predate the empire by centuries, possibly the work of an earlier civilization with forgotten techniques. Local legends speak of giants or supernatural aid, but archaeology points to something just as extraordinary: sheer human ingenuity. The blocks' bases are slightly tapered, a design that would have reduced friction during transport. Notches carved into their sides suggest a system of ropes and pulleys, while nearby depressions might have held temporary pivot points for redirecting their path. Yet for all this brilliance, the site also whispers of overreach. The largest stones were never used, left stranded in the quarry like abandoned dreams. Was it warfare that disrupted the work? An invasion by the Pomeran Empire in the 3rd century could explain the sudden halt, or perhaps the builders simply met their match. The temple's later phases switched to smaller, more manageable blocks, hinting at a sobering realization. Even Rome's might had its limits. What makes Baalbek unforgettable isn't just the scale of its ambition, but the humility hidden in its unfinished state. These stones are a testament to what happens when vision collides with reality, where the line between engineering marvel and impossible dream blurs. They challenge us to rethink what ancient societies could achieve, while reminding us that every civilization, no matter how advanced, eventually faces the weight of its own ambitions. High on a hilltop in southern Africa, the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe curve and climb like a giant serpent frozen mid-movement, some sections soaring to 11 meters tall, others stopping abruptly as if the builders simply vanished. Unlike European castles cemented with mortar, these walls were crafted through sheer precision, each granite block carefully shaped to lock into the next without adhesive. The unfinished sections offer something rare, an X-ray into the minds of medieval African engineers. Where completed walls show only polished results, the broken-off courses reveal the meticulous process behind them. Leveling lines scratched into stone, trial placements marked by wear patterns, even the order in which teams worked from base to summit. What caused these projects to halt mid-construction? The theories are as layered as the walls themselves. One compelling clue lies in the soil. Archaeologists have found fewer imported artifacts: Chinese celadon pottery, Persian glass beads in the later construction phases. This suggests a decline in the gold and ivory trade that fueled Zimbabwe's wealth. Imagine a thriving city suddenly cut off from its economic lifelines, its artisans and laborers dispersing as resources dwindled. The walls didn't just stop, they tell us when the kingdom's heartbeat began to falter. Yet even in their incompleteness, these structures showcase brilliance. The dry stone technique wasn't just practical, it was poetic. Builders selected granite blocks with natural flat surfaces, minimizing carving. They alternated stone sizes to distribute weight, creating stability that's endured 8 centuries of wind and rain. In one unfinished section, you can see how they keyed corners interlocking stones like puzzle pieces at right angles to prevent collapse. This wasn't haphazard stacking, it was geometry in service of endurance. The most telling gaps are near the elite enclosures. Here, walls meant to encircle royal compounds stop mid-course, their foundations sloping awkwardly. Some believe this reflects a power struggle, perhaps a faction lost influence before their additions could be completed. Others point to climate records showing prolonged droughts in the 1400s. A society that could move mountains of stone still couldn't escape the whims of nature. What makes great Zimbabwe's unfinished walls so poignant is their honesty. They don't hide the cracks of a civilization under pressure. Instead, they invite us to trace the final days of a kingdom with our fingers feeling the last stones placed, the last problems solved before silence fell over the hilltop. In their incompleteness, they speak louder than any finished monument ever could. Carved into the rust-colored cliffs where the Mingun-Daro and Kingi rivers converge, the Leshan giant Buddha doesn't just watch over the landscape, it reshaped it. Towering 71 meters tall, this monumental statue took 90 years to complete, its creation so ambitious that it changed the very flow of water around it. But hidden beneath the Buddha's serene gaze lies a network of tunnels and chambers never fully finished, their purpose as enigmatic as the legend of the architect who supposedly blinded himself in despair. Recent laser scans reveal these hollow spaces like an architectural nervous system, narrow passages snaking behind the statue's ears, alcoves cut into the torso, even a vertical shaft rising through the chest. Some scholars believe they were meant to house sacred relics, turning the Buddha into a colossal reliquary. Others argue they served a practical role, maintenance access for repairs to the statue's intricate drainage system. This wasn't just art, it was engineering on a geological scale. The builders carved gutters into the Buddha's hair to channel rainwater, designed layered stone robes to disguise expansion joints, and even diverted rivers to prevent erosion at the statue's base. The project was so vast it functioned like a hydrological dam, calming treacherous currents that once capsized boats, a feat of environmental engineering masked as religious devotion. Yet the most haunting detail isn't in the stone, it's in the human story. According to Tang Dynasty records, the lead monk, Haitong, grew so frustrated with funding shortages and technical setbacks that he tore out his own eyes to prove his dedication. Whether literal or symbolic, the tale captures the near-impossible scale of the challenge. Imagine workers dangling from ropes, chiseling millimeter by millimeter down the cliff face, their progress measured in lifetimes. The unfinished chambers suggest they adapted as they went, abandoning some tunnels when stability became uncertain, repurposing others as the vision evolved. What makes this site extraordinary is how it merges spiritual aspiration with raw problem solving. The Buddha's curled hair, for instance, isn't just decorative. Each spiral is a carved gutter, funneling water away from the face. The ears, elongated in traditional style, conceal hidden drainage channels. Even the statue's posture serves a function. The hands resting on knees reinforce the cliff against seismic shifts. This wasn't just a statue, It was a dialogue between human ambition and natural forces, where every artistic choice answered an engineering need. The unfinished spaces, then, aren't failures. They are evidence of a mind-bending creative process. Like sketches in a master artist's notebook, they show the iterations behind the icon. Some tunnels stop abruptly where the rock proved too brittle. Others branch unexpectedly, suggesting last-minute changes. In their rawness, they reveal what perfection obscures: the struggle, the recalculations, the moments when even the grandest visions had to compromise with the stone. The Leshan giant Buddha may appear complete to the world, but its hidden hollows whisper the truth that greatness is never a straight path, but a series of adaptations carved into the cliffs of time. The story of the Tower of Babel echoes through time not as a single abandoned structure, but as a recurring theme in human history. In ancient Babylon, the ziggurat known as Etemenanke rose toward the heavens, its 7 tiers symbolizing the celestial realms. Unlike the biblical tale of divine intervention scattering languages, the real reasons for its unfinished state were far more human: conquest, shifting power, and the relentless march of time. Cuneiform tablets describe a vision of glazed blue bricks and a golden summit, but today the ruins tell a different story, one of layered ambitions, each ruler leaving their mark like signatures in clay. Walk through the site now and you'll see the evidence of these interruptions. The lower levels, built by King Hammurabi, show precise, uniform brickwork. Higher up, the style shifts abruptly: larger, rougher blocks added centuries later by Nebuchadnezzar II, who sought to outdo his predecessors. Some sections were never faced with the promised enameled tiles, their mudbrick cores exposed like raw nerves. It's as if the ziggurat became a living record of Babylon's rise and fall, each dynasty grafting its aspirations onto the old bones of the last. The most revealing detail, though, lies in the tablets. Among the grand proclamations are mundane work orders, requests for extra bitumen to waterproof joints, complaints about delayed lumber shipments. These fragments humanize the project, showing it wasn't just a symbolic gesture, but a logistical nightmare. One tablet even mentions a labor strike when rations ran low. The higher the ziggurat grew, the more it strained the empire's resources, until finally the Persians arrived. Cyrus the Great saw no need to complete what he considered a monument to arrogance, and so the upper tiers remained a skeleton of scaffolding and dreams. What makes Etemenanke so compelling isn't just its scale, but its symbolism. Unlike pyramids or temples, ziggurats were never meant to be entered. They were cosmic ladders, their stairways designed for gods, not mortals. Every unfinished tier whispers the same question: how high is too high? The cracks in the bricks, the mismatched styles, the abandoned ramps, they're not just signs of failure, but of a civilization repeatedly testing its limits. Even in ruin, the tower's legacy endures, a testament to humanity's eternal push against the boundaries of the possible, and the humbling forces that remind us we're only human after all. Barcelona's Sagrada Familia isn't just a cathedral, it's a conversation across centuries. Unlike the ancient ruins we've explored, this structure breathes and evolves, its cranes and scaffolds as much a part of its identity as Gaude's original mosaics. Yet for all its modernity, the basilica shares uncanny parallels with the half-finished monuments of antiquity. Both are testaments to the same truth: great visions often outlive their creators, leaving future generations to decipher their intent. Gaudi knew he wouldn't live to see completion. When he died in 1926, less than a quarter of the project was finished. Like the pharaohs who commissioned pyramids they'd never enter, he left behind a labyrinth of sketches, models, and cryptic notes, some destroyed during the Spanish Civil War, others painstakingly reconstructed. Today's architects face the same challenge as those restoring ancient temples: How to honor original vision while adapting to new realities. The basilica's famous nativity facade, overseen by Gaudi himself, teems with organic details, turtles at the base symbolizing earth, chameleons representing change. But the newer Passion facade, completed in the 21st century, bears the stark, angular marks of modern sculptors. This tension between past and present mirrors the layered histories of sites like the Tower of Babel, where each ruler left their stylistic imprint. The construction methods bridge eras too. Ancient engineers relied on scale models and proportional diagrams. Gaudi used hanging chains and weighted strings to calculate arches. Now drones and 3D printers map the remaining work, yet some puzzles resist technology. Gaudi's surviving plaster models lack precise measurements, forcing teams to extrapolate from his handwritten ratios, much like Egyptologists piecing together pyramid blueprints from fragmented worker logs. Debates rage over authenticity. Should stained glass use traditional pigments or vibrant modern hues? Can reinforced concrete substitute for stone where structural needs demand it? These aren't new questions. The Romans faced similar dilemmas when completing Greek temples, just as Inca successors adjusted sacred designs mid-construction. The Sagrada Familia's unfinished state makes these choices visible, turning every visitor into a witness to the creative process. What truly links this basilica to ancient sites is its relationship with time. Projected completion in 2026, a century after Gaudi's death, echoes the generational labor of medieval cathedrals. The building grows like a living thing, its spires stretching skyward as slowly as coral reefs form underwater. In a world obsessed with speed, it stands as a rare reminder that some dreams can't and shouldn't be rushed. The cracks in its mortar, the evolving designs, the scaffolds that never quite disappear, they're not signs of failure, but of a project alive with the same restless energy that drove the pyramid builders and ziggurat architects. The Sagrada Familia may be young compared to our other sites, but it carries their legacy forward, proving that the most enduring monuments aren't those frozen in perfection, but those brave enough to remain unfinished. High in Peru's Sacred Valley, the half-built walls of Olante Tambo's Sun Temple cling to the mountainside like an interrupted symphony. Unlike other Inca sites polished to perfection, this temple's unfinished state lays bare the desperate final days of an empire under siege. The most striking feature isn't what was completed, it's the 50-ton monolith left mid-carving, its surface pockmarked with tool marks, its edges rough where they should have been smoothed into seamless joints. This single stone is a time machine, transporting us to the exact moment when everything changed. The monolith's position tells a dramatic story. It lies halfway up a steep quarry slope, surrounded by earthen ramps and discarded ropes made from iku grass. Archaeologists have recreated the process. Workers would have levered the stone onto log rollers, then hauled it uphill using a pulley system anchored to stone hooks still visible along the route. What's extraordinary is the precision persisting even in crisis. The block's partially carved protrusions, called bosses, weren't mistakes. They were handling points meant to be removed after transport. Even facing annihilation, the Inca adhered to their exacting standards, but the true revelation lies in what's missing. When Spanish forces advanced in the 1530s, the Inca didn't just abandon their work, they actively sabotaged it. Sacred stones were rolled into ravines or buried beneath false floors to hide them from desecration. Some were deliberately killed by chipping their ceremonial edges, a spiritual act to release their essence before capture. This wasn't surrender, it was strategic retreat. The scattered stones form a kind of resistance blueprint, with unfinished walls acting as decoys to distract from hidden sanctuaries in the cliffs above. The temple's design itself speaks volumes about Inca resilience. The surviving terrace walls angle slightly inward, a seismic adaptation that helped them survive centuries of earthquakes. The stone channels cut into unfinished blocks weren't just decorative, they aligned with solstice sunrises, turning the entire mountainside into a celestial calendar. Even in its fragmented state, the site retains this dual purpose: a fortress and observatory, workshop and worship space. Perhaps most moving are the traces left by individual workers. Fingerprints remain pressed into clay mortar where someone pressed too hard. A set of carved steps ends abruptly, the last one only half emerged from the rock. These aren't just construction features, they're the physical handwriting of people working against time. The Spanish recorded their surprise at finding tools still warm and meals uneaten when they took the site, evidence of how suddenly the end came. Olante Tambo's power lies in this suspended animation. Where Machu Picchu shows us Inca achievement at its peak, these fractured walls reveal the human cost of collapse. Yet they also whisper of quiet defiance. The very fact that we can still piece together their techniques from these fragments proves their plan worked. The knowledge survived, hidden in plain sight, waiting for a future that would finally listen. Rising from the ochre sands of Pakistan's Kholistan Desert, Derawar Fort's colossal walls stretch toward the sky like a mirage, its 40 bastions standing sentinel over an empire that never was. The fort's symmetrical beauty belies its fractured history. Walk along the perimeter, and you'll suddenly encounter sections where the brickwork dissolves into dunes, revealing the ghostly outline of what should have been. These truncated walls aren't the result of erosion or time. They're the scars of ambitions derailed by tribal wars and political chess games. Unlike Europe's fairy tale castles built for royalty, Derawar was a fortress of pragmatism, where every arch and corridor answered the desert's harsh demand. The most telling clues lie beneath the surface. Archaeologists mapping the site discovered a network of half-excavated underground tanks, their carefully sloped floors designed to channel every precious drop of rainwater. This was hydrological engineering ahead of its time, a system that would have allowed the fort to sustain thousands during sieges or droughts. The unfinished sections reveal how builders planned to link these reservoirs with qanats, ancient underground aqueducts borrowed from Persian technology. But the pipes stop abruptly, their terracotta mouths buried mid-route like unfinished sentences. What interrupted this desert masterpiece? The answers are etched in the brickwork itself. Some walls show sudden shifts in craftsmanship, fine, uniform layers giving way to haphazard patches, as if new laborers were brought in under duress. Local chronicles speak of the 18th century power struggle between the Nawabs of Bahawalpur and nomadic tribes, with Derawar caught in the crossfire. The fort changed hands 13 times in 50 years, each occupation leaving its mark. One bastion bears the pockmarks of cannon fire. Another shows where hastily built reinforcements jut awkwardly from original walls. This wasn't just a construction site abandoned, it was a battleground where architecture became collateral damage. Yet even in its incomplete state, Derawar showcases ingenious adaptations. The fort's orientation aligns with wind patterns to funnel breezes into living quarters, a natural cooling system. The bricks, made from clay mixed with desert plants, developed self-healing properties as the fibers expanded and contracted with temperature shifts. And those iconic circular bastions, they weren't just for defense. Their curved surfaces deflected sandstorms, reducing erosion in a region where wind could scour stone to dust in decades. The real tragedy of Derawar lies in what might have been. Scrolls from the Bahawalpur Royal Archives describe plans for an entire planned city radiating from the fort, with shaded bazaars and satellite forts forming a protective ring. Today, those dreams survive only as faint lines in the sand, a reminder that even the mightiest strongholds are no match for the tides of history. The desert, ever patient, continues its slow reclamation, blurring the line between what was built and what was merely imagined. Malbork Castle's crimson bricks glow like embers against the Polish sky, a monument to power, faith, and the cold reality of empty coffers. What began as the Teutonic Knight's grandest statement, designed to overshadow every European fortress, became instead a frozen blueprint of compromise. Wander its corridors today, and you'll witness medieval engineering in crisis mode. Soaring Gothic arches that suddenly switch from sculpted stone to plain brick, elaborate ribbed vaults simplified into flat ceilings, towers left stump like where their spires should have pierced the clouds. These aren't failures of skill, they're the fingerprints of a medieval budget committee at work. The castle's most telling feature lies in its material shifts. Early sections boast imported sandstone for carvings and trim, each knight's portrait crisply detailed. But as funds dwindled after 1457, builders turned to local brick, cheaper, faster, but far less glamorous. The change wasn't just aesthetic, it altered construction itself. Brick couldn't replicate stone's delicate tracery, forcing architects to reinvent Gothic principles on the fly. In the Great Refectory, they painted faux stone patterns onto brick surfaces, creating illusions of grandeur even as the real thing slipped away. It was medieval smoke and mirrors, proof that financial stress breeds creativity as much as constraint. Yet Malbork's interrupted state reveals unexpected advantages. Those budget-friendly bricks fired from Baltic clay proved more flexible than stone during sieges, absorbing cannon shots rather than shattering. The simplified vaults, though less ornate, distributed weight more efficiently, allowing taller walls. Even the abandoned sections served purpose. Half-built outer wards became improvised killing zones, funneling attackers into traps. What began as cost-cutting measures accidentally birthed military innovations that would influence fortress design for centuries. The castle's ledgers, preserved in a Krakow archive, tell the human story behind the stone. Pages detail desperate fundraising efforts, indulgences sold to pilgrims, loans from Italian bankers with punishing interest. One entry notes the sale of the knight's ceremonial silver plates to pay masons. Another lists rations halved for laborers. This wasn't mere austerity, it was the slow unraveling of a holy empire. The Teutonic Order, once Europe's terror, had overextended itself fighting Poland and Lithuania, its crusader idealism buckling under logistical realities. What makes Malbork so poignant isn't its scale, though it remains the largest brick castle on Earth, but its unfinished whispers. In the chapter house, faint outlines on walls show where stained glass should have glittered. The Grandmaster's planned suite ends abruptly in raw brick, its fireplace installed but never used. These gaps speak louder than any completed room could, reminding us that even the mightiest institutions cloaked in divine mandate and martial pride must eventually kneel before the ledger book. The castle's survival, despite its compromises, stands as testament to an eternal truth. Sometimes the greatest strength lies not in achieving perfection, but in knowing when to adapt. The Huaka del Sol rises from Peru's coastal desert like a sandcastle melting under time's relentless tide, once the largest adobe structure in the ancient Americas, now a crumbling testament to both human ingenuity and human greed. Unlike stone pyramids that wear their age with dignity, this moche masterpiece of sun-baked mud bricks wears its wounds openly, its sides slashed by Spanish conquistadors who diverted rivers to wash away entire sections in search of gold. What they left behind is unexpectedly precious, a cross-section revealing centuries of layered history, each stratum as vivid as a page in a book. Peer closely at the exposed faces, and you'll spot the fingerprints of an entire civilization. Each ruler added their own layer to the pyramid, stamping bricks with unique markings, zigzags, circles, even handprints pressed into the clay. These aren't just construction notes, they're political statements. A thick layer of uniform bricks signals a prosperous reign with ample labor, while thinner sections with mixed materials hint at drought or unrest. The pyramid grows like a living chronicle, its height fluctuating with the fortunes of the Mach elite. One dramatic shift near the base shows where builders switched from fine coastal clay to rougher highland soil, possibly reflecting trade route disruptions or conquered territories assimilated into the empire. But the real revelation lies in the maintenance. Adobe, vulnerable to El Niño's torrential rains, required constant repair. The exposed layers show ingenious adaptations. Straw fibers mixed into bricks for flexibility, drainage channels hidden beneath decorative facades, even entire outer skins replaced like a snake shedding its skin. In one section, archaeologists found a bandage of fresh adobe slapped over erosion damage, still bearing the tool marks of the worker who applied it centuries ago. This wasn't just architecture, it was a dialogue with nature, a fight against entropy waged one mud brick at a time. Yet for all their skill, the Mach couldn't anticipate the greatest threat, human indifference. After the Spanish attacks, the abandoned pyramid faced unchecked erosion. Wind-carved gullies where ceremonial ramps once stood. Rare desert rains dissolved elaborate friezes into surreal drips resembling Dali paintings. Ironically, this neglect preserved what conquest might have destroyed. The eroded surfaces revealed construction techniques invisible in intact structures, like the color-coded clay mixes used to track different work gangs, or the stepped internal terraces that stabilized each new addition. What makes Huaca del Sol so haunting isn't just its physical decay, but the stories whispered by its scars. That dark stripe of ash, evidence of a ritual burning when a ruler died. Those child-sized handprints pressed into a brick, likely a community event where even the youngest contributed, and those bizarre, zigzagging channels cutting through multiple layers. Archaeologists now believe they were seismic reinforcements, earthquake-proofing designed after earlier tremors shattered lesser temples. Standing before this ravaged giant, you're left with a profound paradox. The very forces that destroyed the pyramid, greed, conquest, time also unlocked its secrets. Where polished monuments hide their truths behind grand facades, Huaca del Sol's wounds lay bare the heartbeat of a civilization. Each crumbling brick, each exposed layer, each faded handprint insists, we were here, we built, we adapted, and though the rains wash us away, we still have something to say. Buried beneath the dusty hills of southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe waits like a time capsule sealed by Neolithic hands, a sanctuary so ancient it predates stone, hinged by 6,000 years, older than agriculture itself. What makes this site extraordinary isn't just its age, but the deliberate act of its own burial. Around 8,000 BCE, someone carefully filled in the massive circular enclosures, entombing towering limestone pillars, some half-carved, others adorned with intricate animal reliefs under layers of rubble and earth. This wasn't neglect, it was preservation on a grand scale, a ritual closing more purposeful than abandonment. The pillars themselves are a puzzle frozen mid-creation. Weighing up to 20 tons, they were quarried from bedrock just meters away, yet many never made it to their final positions. Walk among them today, and you'll see pillars still attached to the living rock, their bases barely freed, like statues refusing to leave the stone that birthed them. The carvings tell their own story. Foxes, scorpions, and vultures emerge in high relief, while other creatures remain mere outlines, as if the artists were interrupted mid-stroke. Archaeologists have found toolkits of flint chisels abandoned nearby, their edges still sharp from last use. This wasn't a site abandoned in panic. It was a project paused, then ceremoniously laid to rest. Why bury such a monumental effort? The leading theory points to climate change. Sediment cores from nearby lakes reveal a brutal drought period beginning around 8200 BCE, centuries of arid winds that would have devastated the wild grains and game these hunter-gatherers relied on. But Göbekli Tepe's burial doesn't match the haste of climate refugees fleeing. The filled dirt contains no household debris, no signs of collapse. Instead, it's clean, almost reverent. Some researchers believe the site was decommissioned as part of a cultural shift, its symbolism tied to a dying way of life. The animal carvings, predators and prey frozen in eternal dance, may have represented a spiritual relationship with nature that no longer made sense as survival grew harder. The unfinished pillars offer a masterclass in Neolithic design. Chalky lines still trace where artists planned reliefs, proving they sketched directly onto the stone before carving. Some pillars show multiple revisions: a boar's head shifted lower, a bird's wingspan widened, revealing a creative process as fluid as any modern sculptor's. Most haunting are the practice stones found nearby, smaller slabs where apprentices tested techniques before committing to the monoliths. These discarded drafts capture the moment when human artistry first dared to wrestle meaning from raw stone. What truly sets Göbekli Tepe apart is what it lacks. Unlike later temples, there's no evidence of permanent settlement, no houses, no granaries. This was a sacred space built by nomadic people who returned seasonally, moving mountains of stone with nothing but antler picks and rope. The buried layers even suggest they rebuilt the site multiple times, dismantling older enclosures to erect grander ones, a cycle of renewal abruptly halted. The site's deliberate burial may be its greatest gift to us. The earth acted as a perfect preservative, shielding delicate carvings from erosion and later plowing. Those half-finished pillars, those tool marks left crisp and unchallenged. Let us walk alongside the artists, seeing their vision as they saw it, raw and unresolved. Göbekli Tepe doesn't just show us early architecture. It shows us the moment humanity first grappled with a question that still haunts us today: how to honor what must be left behind. Descending into Chand Baori feels like stepping into an inverted pyramid, a mesmerizing maze of 3,500 precisely arranged steps cascading 13 stories down into the earth. Unlike ornate temples or palaces, this 10th century stepwell near Jaipur marries brutal functionality with hypnotic beauty, its zigzagging staircases forming a geometric masterpiece designed to harvest every precious drop of monsoon rain. But crane your neck upward and you'll notice something jarring. The structure's crown is missing. Where intricate pavilions grace other Rajasthani stepwells, Chand Baori's summit remains raw and open to the sky, as if the builders simply walked away mid-sentence. Local storytellers whisper of a curse, a queen who drowned in the well's depths, her spirit demanding the upper chambers remain unfinished as penance. But crumbling ledgers in the nearby Abhanri village tell a different tale. Records from the reign of Raja Shanda reveal shifting budgets, funds diverted to fortify borders against invading Turkic armies in the 1100s. The missing pavilion wasn't supernatural, it was a casualty of war. The steps themselves betray this abrupt halt, while the lower flights show where, from centuries of use, the uppermost stairs remain sharp-edged, their corners never softened by the tread of bare feet. What makes Chand Baori extraordinary is how its incompleteness reveals its genius. The steps aren't uniform, they narrow slightly as they descend, creating an optical illusion that makes the well appear even deeper. This wasn't accidental. Engineers calculated the angles to maximize shade, keeping water evaporation to a minimum during Rajasthan's blistering summers. The crisscrossing staircases, some as narrow as a shoulder's width, were designed to prevent crowding during droughts when entire villages would descend simultaneously. Even the absence of the pavilion served purpose. Without roof obstructions, monsoon clouds could dump rain directly into the central reservoir, funneled by precisely sloped channels. Recent laser scans uncovered something astonishing beneath the visible structure. A hidden second well shaft plunges even deeper, its walls lined with porous sandstone to filter silt, an ancient water purification system. Archaeologists found chisel marks indicating plans to connect this lower chamber to the missing pavilion via a spiral staircase, turning the entire complex into a multi-level water temple. The abandoned blueprints suggest rituals where priests would descend from ornate upper chambers to draw purified water for ceremonies, physically enacting the journey from heavens to underworld. The stepwell's interrupted state also preserves rare construction clues. On the western wall, a vertical row of square holes marks where scaffolding poles once braced masons as they worked downward, a method unique to subterranean architecture. Nearby, trial carvings on unfinished panels show artisans practicing floral motifs before committing them to permanent stone. These half-realized details transform Chand Bayori from a static monument into a living workshop, its walls whispering the conversations between engineers, sculptors, and the parched earth they sought to conquer. Perhaps most poignant is what the missing pavilion represents, not failure but adaptation. When royal patronage vanished, the well kept functioning perfectly. Villagers added makeshift shrines in the alcoves where kings once lounged. Travelers etched prayers into the naked upper walls. The structure's raw crown became a canvas for collective memory, proving that sometimes the most enduring designs are those left open to interpretation, their unfinished edges inviting generations to add their own layers of meaning. The Great Wall of China stretches across mountains and deserts like a dragon's backbone, but look closer and you'll discover its hidden fractures. Beyond the postcard, perfect brick battlements of the Ming dynasty lie older, rougher scars, crumbling rammed earth walls half swallowed by the landscape, their edges fraying like unraveled rope. These forgotten fragments tell a different story than the towering fortifications we imagine, one of rushed construction, shifting priorities, and the messy reality of unifying a continent-sized empire under constant threat. Walk along these eroded ridges in Gansu province, and you're tracing the fingerprints of China's first emperors. The earliest walls, built during the Qin dynasty in the 3rd century BC, weren't majestic stone barriers but pragmatic speed-built ramparts. Workers packed local soil between wooden frames, pounding each layer with logs, a technique visible in the striations still etched into surviving sections. These weren't meant to last centuries. They were emergency bulwarks against nomadic raids, thrown up in months as the empire expanded faster than its infrastructure could support. The very crudeness of their construction exposes the Qin's desperation. In some places, the wall is just a ditch and berm, a psychological barrier as much as a physical one. Yet these humble ruins reveal brilliant adaptations. Archaeologists found bundles of reeds buried within the rammed earth, an ancient reinforcement technique to prevent cracking in arid climates. Watchtowers were spaced precisely at arrow-shot intervals, proving tactical thinking outweighed aesthetic concerns. Most telling are the abrupt endings where construction halted, often mid-hill. These aren't erosion points, they're frozen moments when dynasties collapsed or priorities shifted. One section in Ningxia stops at a cliff edge, its intended extension marked only by surveyors' stones, like a sentence cut off mid-thought. The contrast with later Ming-era walls couldn't be starker. Where Qin builders used whatever dirt was nearby, Ming engineers standardized bricks and mortar, creating supply chains stretching thousands of miles. The older walls follow natural contours like rivers. The newer ones slice across geography with mathematical precision. This evolution mirrors China's transformation from warring states to centralized superpower, but the gaps between these eras whisper of catastrophic failures. In the Badain-Jaran Desert, a lone Han Dynasty watchtower stands isolated, its connecting walls long vanished. Sandstorms, the grooves in its base show where workers dismantled adjacent sections to reuse materials when funding dried up. Even the mightiest empires faced brutal triage. What's most humbling is how nature reclaims these spaces. Near the Mongolian border, a 700-year-old wall segment has been colonized by a peculiar ecosystem. Drought-resistant grasses root themselves in the mortar cracks, while burrowing owls nest in watchtower alcoves. The wall becomes something new, not a barrier, but a habitat. Elsewhere, farmers repurposed collapsed ramparts as terraces, their crops fed by centuries of decomposed mud bricks. These unintended afterlives challenge our notion of abandonment. The walls kept serving human needs long after their original purpose faded. The true lesson of these fragmented sections isn't about military strategy, it's about ambition's limits. The Kin wall builders left behind labor camp records detailing grueling conditions, men working in shifts so relentless their bones showed stress fractures. One tablet lists deaths from falling rocks with the same bureaucratic detachment as inventory tallies. These weren't just construction sites, they were pressure cookers where imperial dreams collided with human endurance. The unfinished segments, then, are more than construction pauses their relief valves, moments when the empire had to acknowledge it was pushing too hard, too fast. Today, as tourists flock to the restored Ming sections, these older ruins remain overlooked, their rough surfaces too fragile for foot traffic. Yet in their imperfection, they guard a more honest history. The smooth, photogenic walls of Badaling tell a story of power and permanence, but the broken ramparts of the Han and Kin whisper the truth that even the greatest defenses are provisional, shaped as much by collapse as by triumph. They stand not as failures, but as reminders that every wall, no matter how grand, is really just a snapshot of a society's fears and capabilities at a single moment in time. And sometimes the most revealing snapshots are the ones where the picture isn't finished. The Segovia Aqueduct's towering granite arches cut through the Spanish city like a frozen waterfall, a masterpiece of Roman engineering that has carried water for nearly 2,000 years. But few visitors notice the clues hidden in the surrounding hills, where the aqueduct's original plan unravels into a ghostly network of abandoned channels and half-dug trenches. These forgotten scars tell a story of ambition humbled by geography and the ingenious pivot that saved an entire city's water supply. Follow the aqueduct's path uphill, and you'll stumble upon the first miscalculation, a shallow depression where Roman surveyors expected to find their water source. The elevation markers carved into nearby rocks don't match the terrain, a rare mistake from engineers famed for their precision. Core samples reveal why. The team had relied on outdated maps from earlier Iberian settlements, unaware that seismic shifts had subtly altered the landscape over centuries. By the time they realized their error, tons of granite had already been quarried and shaped. What happened next reveals the Romans' true genius. Instead of forcing the original route, they adapted. Scattered throughout the countryside are the remains of their backup plan, a secondary channel system that snakes along a completely different path. This wasn't just a repair, it was a total redesign. The new route incorporated a series of settling tanks to filter sediment and gradient adjustments so precise they maintained water flow despite the lower starting point. Most remarkably, they repurposed the already cut stones, reshaping them to fit the revised angles. The abandoned trenches became quarries for the revised project, their grooves still showing where workers chiseled blocks to new specifications. The real marvel lies in what these fragments teach us about Roman problem solving. Laser scans of the unused channels show meticulous adjustments. Slight widenings here, reinforced shoulders there, proving the engineers were testing solutions on the failed route before committing to the new one. Near the town of Ravenga, a half-finished arch stands as a time capsule of this transition. Its keystone is cut differently from the rest, a prototype for the revised curvature that would define the final aqueduct. Modern hydrologists have calculated the consequences of that initial surveying error. Had the Romans stubbornly pursued their original plan, Segovia's water pressure would have dropped by nearly 40%, leaving upper neighborhoods dry. Instead, the adaptive route not only worked, it accidentally improved the system. The gentler final gradient reduced erosion, helping the aqueduct outlast empires. Those abandoned trenches, now overgrown with wild lavender, are more than failures. They're the blueprint for one of history's greatest engineering saves, proving that sometimes the most enduring solutions come from knowing when to let go of the plan. Buried beneath Borobudur's towering stupas and serene Buddha statues lies a secret layer of storytelling, one the temple's builders deliberately hid from view. When archaeologists first uncovered the concealed base in the 19th century, they found over 160 intricately carved panels depicting scenes straight out of ancient Javanese morality tales. Lovers entwined, merchants haggling, warriors boasting. These reliefs were never meant to be seen. Shortly after their completion in the 9th century, workers enclosed them behind a massive stone terrace, sealing away what may have been Buddhism's most candid exploration of human desire. The reason for this architectural edit remains hotly debated. Some scholars point to structural necessity. The original base may have begun sinking under the temple's immense weight, requiring additional support. But the carvings themselves suggest a deeper, more philosophical shift. Unlike the upper level's serene depictions of enlightenment, the hidden panels pulsate with earthly drama. A particularly vivid scene shows a woman admiring herself in a mirror while servants fan her, an unambiguous critique of vanity. Another panel reveals a drunken brawl outside a tavern, complete with toppled cups and staggered figures. This wasn't just decoration, it was a visual sermon on the traps of material existence, rendered with startling humanity. What makes Borobudur's hidden base extraordinary is how it captures a moment of theological revision. The covering terrace isn't a crude patch job. It's elegantly designed with precise masonry joints that match the rest of the structure. This suggests the change was planned, not panicked. Perhaps the Sailendra dynasty, who commissioned the temple, reconsidered their initial approach. The original design may have intended pilgrims to ascend from depictions of worldly life toward nirvana, physically enacting Buddhism's path. But sealing the base transformed the experience. Visitors now began their journey one level higher, skipping the earthly phase altogether. It's as if the architects decided enlightenment shouldn't start by wallowing in desire, but by rising above it. Modern technology has revealed even more secrets. Ground-penetrating radar shows the buried reliefs were carved in situ. The stone was shaped after the blocks were set, not before. This explains why some panels abruptly end at the terrace line, their narratives cut off mid-scene. Workers clearly knew the carvings would be hidden as they made them, yet still lavished them with detail. X-rays even reveal pigment traces beneath the surface, proving these scenes were originally painted in vibrant hues before being entombed in stone. The most tantalizing clue lies in a small, unfinished corner of the hidden base. Here, the reliefs transition from secular scenes to Buddhist parables, suggesting the designers were mid-shift when the change order came. A half-carved panel shows a prince beginning his spiritual journey, his upper body detailed, his lower half just rough chisel marks. This frozen moment captures the precise instant when Borobudur's purpose pivoted from teaching through contrast to elevating through omission. Today, a single exposed section of the original base remains visible on the temple's southeast corner, left uncovered during 19th century restorations. Standing before it, you're struck by the raw intimacy of these forbidden carvings. Where the upper reliefs feel detached and instructional, these hidden scenes thrum with humor, tragedy, and frailty, a reminder that even in a monument dedicated to transcendence, the builders couldn't resist celebrating the messy, glorious humanity they were urging pilgrims to leave behind. The buried base doesn't just conceal, it confesses. In hiding our earthly nature, Borobudur ultimately reveals how tightly it's woven into the path toward the divine. Deep in the sun-baked quarries of Aswan, another granite giant lies trapped in the earth Queen Hatshepsut's unfinished obelisk, a monument that never stood but speaks volumes. Unlike its completed cousins at Karnak, this pink granite behemoth remains fused to the bedrock, its surface is scarred by the very tools meant to liberate it. At 42 meters long, it would have dwarfed every obelisk in Egypt, a needle of stone meant to pierce the heavens in honor of the female pharaoh who dared to rule as a king. But the cracks running through its base tell only part of the story. The real drama is etched in the hieroglyphs left behind by the workers themselves, complaints about blistering heat, water shortages, and backbreaking labor that give us an uncensored look at the human cost of ancient megalomania. Walk along the obelisk's length, and you'll spot something extraordinary amidst the chisel marks, graffiti like inscriptions normally forbidden near royal projects. One reads, "The boss is pushing too hard, we have no ointment for our burns." Another laments, "The children are crying for bread." These aren't the usual praises to pharaohs, they're the muted protests of exhausted laborers, scratched discreetly where overseers might miss them. The heat in Aswan's quarries could reach 50 degrees Celsius, and the workers' tools, dolerite pounders and copper chisels, required constant resharpening, turning each workday into a marathon of pain. Archaeologists have found piles of broken tools nearby, their edges worn down to nubs from relentless use. Yet the site also reveals Hatshepsut's ingenious, if ruthless, problem-solving. When cracks appeared in the granite, her engineers didn't abandon the project immediately. They attempted repairs by carving deeper trenches around the floors, essentially performing stone surgery on a colossal scale. Nearby, smaller abandoned obelisks show similar fracture patterns, suggesting they were test subjects for salvage techniques. The Queen's sculptors even adapted their designs mid-process. Some partially carved hieroglyphs on the obelisk sides are compressed or spaced irregularly, likely to avoid weak spots in the stone. This wasn't just stubbornness, it was a high-stakes balancing act between royal ego and geological reality. The most telling detail, though, lies in the logistics. Clay tablets from the site record desperate requests for supplies, oil for lubricating sledges, linen for bandages, even donkeys to transport food to the remote quarry. One dispatch warns of unrest brewing among Nubian conscripts, who made up much of the workforce. Unlike the polished propaganda on temple walls depicting happy laborers, these documents expose the fragile ecosystem behind every megalith, supply chains stretched thin, cultures clashing under duress, and the constant threat of revolt when basic needs went unmet. What makes Hatshepsut's obelisk uniquely poignant is its duality. On one surface, you'll find the traditional boasts. Her Majesty commands this monument to rise taller than any before. Just centimeters away, hidden in a crevice, a worker's scrawl counters, "My hands are raw, my belly empty." This juxtaposition doesn't diminish the queen's achievements, it humanizes them. The cracks in the stone, the faded complaints, the abandoned tools, they all whisper the same truth, that even the mightiest monuments rely on fragile networks of sweat and endurance. The obelisk's failure to rise doesn't mark Hatshepsut's weakness, but the limits of any single will, royal or otherwise, when pitted against the collective toll of ambition. Today, the quarry feels like a suspended courtroom where history's verdict remains undecided. The obelisk's perfect surfaces, polished where completed, contrast brutally with the ragged trenches of its underside. It's as if the stone itself couldn't decide whether to be a monument or a tombstone, for the queen's vanity, for the workers' suffering, or perhaps for the moment when even ancient Egypt's boundless confidence met the unmovable laws of physics and human endurance. In its incompleteness, it achieves something no flawless obelisk could. It lets us touch the tremors of doubt that ran beneath the foundations of absolute power. High on a mountain ridge overlooking Mexico's Oaxaca Valley, the ruins of Monte Alban hold a celestial secret, an observatory that refused to stay still. Unlike static monuments frozen in time, this Zapotec astronomical complex was torn down and rebuilt at least 5 times between 300 BC and 800 CE, its walls bearing the scars of constant reinvention. Walk through the rubble today, and you'll step over half-demolished staircases that once aligned with solstice sunrises, past abandoned platforms whose angles no longer match the stars. These aren't signs of failure, but of a civilization so devoted to precision that they dismantle entire structures just to track the heavens more accurately. The most telling evidence lies in the building J complex, shaped like an arrowhead pointing southwest. Early versions aligned with the star Capella around 300 BC, but as Earth's axial tilt gradually shifted, a phenomenon called precession, the Zapotec astronomers made radical adjustments. Archaeoastronomers have found layers where walls were deliberately knocked askew, their foundations realigned by fractions of a degree. One partially demolished corridor still shows original markings for the Pleiades cluster's rising point, now obsolete because celestial movements had rendered the alignment outdated. The Zapotec didn't just observe the stars, they waged an architectural arms race against the cosmos itself. What makes Monte Alban extraordinary is how these changes debunk the myth of primitive astronomy. Using nothing but naked eye observations and stone tools, the Zapotec detected precession's slow drift, a discovery Europe wouldn't formalize until Hipparchus in the 2nd century BC. Their solution wasn't to approximate, but to rebuild. In one striking example, a Venus observation platform was deconstructed mid-cycle when priests noticed its sightlines no longer matched the planet's 8-year cycle. The unfinished demolition reveals their method. Workers left strategic sections standing as reference points for the new alignment, turning demolition into a precision instrument. The site also preserves rare evidence of astronomical debate. Carved glyphs on a discarded wall fragment show 2 competing star calendars, one tracking a 260-day ritual cycle, another following a solar year. Nearby, an altar was abruptly expanded to accommodate additional observation points, suggesting competing priestly factions reconciling different systems. This fluidity contradicts the stereotype of ancient cultures as rigidly traditional. The Zapotec treated their sacred sky watching as a living science, willing to tear down tradition in pursuit of truth. Modern laser scans reveal even more sophistication. The observatory's floors contain hidden channels that may have held reflective pools of water or mercury, creating artificial horizons to amplify celestial measurements. Half-finished grooves in some stones suggest abandoned experiments with echoacoustics, perhaps an attempt to correlate sound with planetary movements. Most remarkably, the latest rebuild incorporated corrective angles anticipating future precession, proving the Zapotec understood the sky's changes weren't just cyclical but cumulative. Monte Albon's layered observatory ultimately tells a story of humility as much as brilliance. Each demolition was an admission. Our ancestors' perfect alignment isn't ours, and ours won't be our descendants. In their willingness to dismantle even recently built structures, the Zapotec acknowledged a profound truth that the universe refuses to stand still, and neither should our understanding of it. The unfinished walls and abruptly altered sightlines don't mark uncertainty. They celebrate the courage to change course when the evidence demands it. In a world that often confuses tradition with truth, these ruins remind us that the greatest scientific monuments aren't those carved in stone, but those brave enough to be reshaped by the stars. The Parthenon's marble metopes should have been a symphony in stone, 92 panels of mythological battles, each painstakingly carved to celebrate Athens' triumph over chaos. But look closer and the harmony cracks. High on the temple's Doric frieze, blank spaces gape like missing teeth, their smooth surfaces untouched by chisels. Nearby, half-finished centaurs rear with only their forelegs defined, their hindquarters still trapped in uncarved marble. These aren't errors, they're the scars of a city buckling under the weight of war, where even the god's temple couldn't escape the desperation of the Peloponnesian conflict. The contrast between finished and unfinished metopes tells a startling story. On the southern side, panels depicting the Lapiths battling centaurs show masterful depth, muscles straining under taut skin, cloaks billowing as if wind whipped. But just around the corner, the quality plummets. A metope showing Theseus fighting an Amazon reveals her face crudely hacked, her spear's shaft lopsided. Tool marks here aren't the deliberate strokes of artisans, they're frantic slashes, as if the carvers were racing against time. Archaeologists have even found traces of red pigment in these rougher panels, proof that painters were forced to cover mistakes with washes of color, a cheap fix for work that would have been polished to perfection in peacetime. What caused this collapse in standards? Athenian treasury records from 432 BC tell the grim tale. As Sparta's siege tightened, the city diverted funds from arts to warships. Skilled sculptors were conscripted, replaced by apprentices and even slaves. One fragmentary tablet lists rations for the Thracian stonecutters, likely prisoners of war pressed into service. The hasty workmanship suggests these substitutes lacked training, their chisels biting too deep, their compositions unbalanced. On one panel, a centaur's arm is comically oversized, as if the carver realized too late he'd misjudged the proportions. But the blank metopes are even more revealing. Laser scans show no underdrawings on their surfaces, not even guidelines. This wasn't work paused for later completion. It was space deliberately left empty, a visual admission that resources had run dry. Some scholars believe the missing scenes were meant to depict the Gigantomachy, the god's defeat of the giants, an allegory for Athens' struggle against Sparta. Their absence speaks louder than any finished panel could, a city too besieged to even mythologize its own survival. The miracle is that these flaws survived at all. After the Parthenon's conversion to a Christian church, many metopes were defaced or destroyed. The ones that remain, especially the rough ones, offer something rare, an unfiltered glimpse into the chaos behind classical Greece's polished facade. Where the perfect panels proclaim Athens' divine favor, the unfinished ones whisper of shipwrights stealing marble for repairs, of sculptors trading chisels for spears. They remind us that the Golden Age wasn't a time of untroubled brilliance, but a fragile moment where art and war waged a silent battle across the same stones. The blank spaces aren't failures, they're the sound of a civilization catching its breath, its ideals outstripped by the relentless demands of survival. Buried beneath the sun-baked plains of modern Pakistan, the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro whisper a warning across 4,000 years, a cautionary tale written in half-dug wells and abandoned water channels. This ancient Indus Valley metropolis, once home to 40,000 people, boasts some of history's earliest urban plumbing, intricate drainage systems, public baths, and over 700 wells lining its streets. But wander the lower city's outskirts, and you'll stumble upon something unsettling: dozens of brick-lined shafts that simply stop. Some are shallow pits barely 2 meters deep. Others show meticulous brickwork abruptly abandoned mid-course, their sides still bearing the smudged fingerprints of laborers who walked away. These aren't just unfinished projects, they're geological smoke signals, hinting at an environmental catastrophe that may have unraveled one of humanity's first great civilizations. The clues lie in the well's engineering. Completed shafts in Mohenjo-Daro's center extend 10 meters down, their precisely laid bricks forming perfect cylinders to prevent collapse. But the unfinished ones tell a different story. Archaeologists have found wells where the lower courses shift from standard-sized bricks to irregular fragments, a sign of scavenged materials as groundwater grew scarce. Even more telling are the repair marks. Several functioning wells show patches where workers desperately tried to extend them deeper, adding makeshift linings like stone collars at the base. These weren't casual upgrades, they were triage measures in a losing battle against a sinking water table. Sediment cores drilled around the city paint a grim picture. Layers of saline deposits and dried clay reveal that around 1900 BC, the once reliable Indus River began shifting its course. What had been a predictable water source turned erratic, flooding violently in some years, retreating beyond reach in others. The well's distribution maps this crisis in real time. In the city's oldest neighborhoods, they're spaced evenly, each serving a cluster of homes, but in later expansions the pattern fractures. Wells clustered desperately near the river's former banks, while whole blocks were left dry. The most haunting evidence comes from the work camps. Near the half-dug wells, archaeologists uncovered caches of unused bricks still stacked in pyramids, their surfaces unweathered, proof construction halted suddenly. Nearby, laborers' quarters held intact water jars, their bases thickened for stability, as if ready for transport. These weren't people who planned to leave, they were workers mid-task when the crisis hit a tipping point. What makes Mohenjo-Daro's water crisis so revelatory is its modernity. This wasn't a civilization felled by invasion or plague, but by something eerily familiar, an engineered city colliding with environmental limits. The same meticulous planners who designed gravity-fed sewage systems couldn't outsmart a changing climate. Their abandoned wells stand as monuments to a brutal truth. No amount of urban brilliance can substitute for what nature provides. Yet, even in collapse, the city offers lessons. Some of the last wells dug show ingenious adaptations: narrower shafts to reduce evaporation, deeper sumps to capture faint seepage. One even features a funnel-shaped collector to harvest dew. These weren't surrenders, they were experiments in resilience, proving that even as their world dried up, Mohenjo-Daro's people never stopped trying to solve the problem. Their unfinished wells aren't just relics of failure, they're the first draft of humanity's eternal struggle to balance progress with the planet's limits. Angkor Wat's walls pulse with stories, gods and demons locked in eternal battle, celestial dancers frozen mid-step, entire episodes from Hindu mythology carved with breathtaking precision. But wander through the temple's outer galleries and you'll find something unexpected: stretches of blank sandstone, smooth and untouched by chisels. These aren't eroded surfaces or damaged relics, they're spaces deliberately left empty, like pages torn from a grand epic. The precision of the finished carvings bordering these voids proves the omission was intentional, sparking a debate that cuts to the heart of the Khmer Empire's mysterious decline. Were these walls abandoned in crisis, or do they hold a more profound secret about how the ancients viewed time itself? The blank panels cluster in the temple's northwest corridor, their edges sharp where master carvers abruptly stopped work. Some show faint guidelines etched into the stone, ghostly sketches of scenes never realized. Archaeologists have identified at least 12 such spaces, each large enough to hold intricate narratives. One theory suggests the empire's resources were diverted to endless wars with neighboring Champa, leaving no artisans to complete the vision. Tree ring data from the region supports this. A series of devastating droughts in the mid-12th century would have strained the kingdom's agricultural backbone, forcing tough choices between survival and splendor. But another interpretation emerges from the temple's own cosmology. Angkor Wat wasn't just a place of worship, it was a microcosm of the Hindu universe, its towers representing Mount Meru and its moats the cosmic oceans. In this context, the blank spaces may have been left for future rulers to fill, each adding their chapter to an ever-evolving sacred text. Khmer inscriptions praise kings who extended the glory of their ancestors, suggesting completion was seen as collaborative. The untouched walls become a symbolic inheritance, a challenge flung across centuries. The sandstone itself offers tantalizing clues. Finished reliefs nearby exhibit 3 distinct carving styles across their depth, evidence of multiple generations working on single panels. Tools left in a workshop near the east gate show varying levels of wear. Some chisels appear barely used, as if apprentices were trained specifically for this project. Most revealing are the quarry marks on unfinished blocks, numbered sequences indicating a sophisticated assembly system, where blank panels may have been prepped for later installation. What stories might these voids have held? Scholars tracing the narrative flow of adjacent reliefs suggest missing segments could depict the Mahabharata's quieter moments, exiled heroes in reflection rather than battle. Others propose original Khmer legends lost to time. The most poignant theory comes from the temple's transformation into a Buddhist site centuries later. In these adapted spaces, new carvings were added with no regard for the original grid, as if the blank walls had finally surrendered to a world where continuity no longer mattered. These silent stones speak volumes about the nature of impermanence, where Egypt's unfinished obelisks show us engineering limits, and Rome's abandoned aqueducts reveal logistical miscalculations. Angkor Wat's blank walls present a rarer artifact, the unfulfilled ambition not just of a single ruler, but of civilization itself. They invite us to consider whether the greatest monuments are those that acknowledge their own incompleteness, leaving space for futures that never came. Persepolis wears its interrupted history like a scar, a sprawling complex of half-fluted columns and staircases mid-carving, frozen the moment Alexander the Great's army stormed its gates in 330 BC. Unlike ruins worn down by centuries, this was a living construction site suddenly petrified, its tools dropped mid-stroke. Walk through the gate of all nations today, and you'll see something extraordinary. The bases of columns still bearing chisel marks where artisans were smoothing the stone, their final strokes never completed. The most revealing details, though, are the messages scratched into the stone itself, cuneiform numbers and instructions etched by foremen, turning the entire site into a 2,500-year-old blueprint abruptly abandoned. These stonemason marks are more than just ancient graffiti. They're a Rosetta Stone for understanding Achaemenid engineering, On one unfinished column drum, numbers indicate the sequence for assembly. Block 12 connects to slot D, while nearby, arrows point to which surfaces needed polishing. Some stones have trial carvings of lotus motifs, artisans practicing before committing to the final piece. It's as if the workers expected to return the next morning, their tools lying where they fell. Even the quarry marks on uncut slabs tell a story, symbols denoting which palace wing each block was destined for, proving the Persians operated with military-grade logistics long before modern project management. The abrupt halt also preserves rare evidence of construction techniques. Unfluted columns show how workers carved the characteristic vertical grooves from top to bottom using curved chisels, while half-finished staircases reveal their method, roughing out steps with pickaxes before refining them with finer tools. One doorway frame, partially polished, transitions from rough to smooth like a time lapse of the carving process frozen mid-frame. These aren't just unfinished elements, they're a masterclass in ancient craftsmanship, showcasing every stage from quarry to near completion. What makes Persepolis uniquely haunting is how it captures the human cost of conquest. Clay tablets from the royal archives record desperate last-moments orders for emergency grain shipments to feed workers as Alexander advanced, payrolls showing bonuses paid to stonemasons willing to stay until the end. Some walls bear scorch marks from the burning of the palace, but others show subtler tragedies. A single sandal print preserved in drying mortar, a water jug placed neatly beside an unfinished wall as if its owner meant to return. The site's frozen state also debunks myths about Alexander's destruction. While he did burn the ceremonial palaces, many workshops and residential quarters were left intact, their tools and materials untouched. This suggests the conqueror wanted to halt Persepolis' symbolic power as Persia's spiritual capital, not erase its technical knowledge. Ironically, by stopping construction mid-stride, Alexander inadvertently preserved more building secrets than if the city had been completed or fully demolished. Today, those silent stones speak volumes about the fragility of empire. The perfect columns of completed sections celebrate Persian might, but the rough, unfinished ones tell a more universal truth, that no civilization, no matter how brilliant, is immune to history's sudden turns. The mason's numbers still visible on the stone aren't just instructions, they're unanswered questions, a conversation cut short across millennia. Persepolis stands as a reminder that greatness isn't just measured by what we build, but by what we leave behind when the world changes faster than our plans. High on Bolivia's wind-swept Altiplano, the ruins of Tiwanaku hold a geological mystery, a sunken courtyard that seems to defy logic. Unlike most ancient plazas built level with the surrounding ground, this rectangular enclosure sinks nearly 2 meters below the earth, its sandstone walls tilting at odd angles like a puzzle box dropped mid-assembly. The closer you examine the stonework, the stranger it becomes. Some blocks fit together with the precision of a laser-cut jigsaw, while others gape with finger-width gaps, their edges uneven. This isn't careless craftsmanship, it's an ingenious adaptation to one of the most seismically active regions on Earth, frozen in the moment when even resilience met its match. The courtyard's design reveals a civilization in constant negotiation with the ground beneath its feet. The walls don't just slope inward, they're built in alternating courses of large and small stones, creating flexible joints that could sway during tremors without collapsing. Archaeologists have found traces of a once intricate drainage system beneath the pavement, its channels warped where the earth buckled. But the most telling details are the abandoned repairs. Half-inserted shims, thin stone wedges still protrude from gaps, showing where workers tried to stabilize shifting walls. Piles of unused andesite blocks lie scattered nearby, their surfaces marked with red ochre alignment guides that will never meet their intended mates. What caused this engineering marvel to be abandoned? Core samples tell a dramatic story. Layers of silt sandwiched between courtyard pavers indicate sudden flooding, likely from underground springs disrupted by earthquakes. But the real smoking gun lies in the stone itself. Geochemical analysis shows that the later, rougher repairs used a different quarry source, a sign of desperation when the original supply routes failed. One massive lintel stone, cracked down the middle, was braced with copper clamps in a botched attempt to save it. The clamp marks are crude compared to Tiwanaku's famed metalwork, suggesting the fixes were rushed, last-ditch efforts. The courtyard's unfinished state preserves rare knowledge about Andean seismic engineering. The floating foundation, technique where walls sit on beds of compacted gravel instead of solid footings, was perfected here centuries before the Inca adopted it. You can see the method frozen mid-application. One corner of the courtyard has its gravel layer fully exposed, never covered by the final paving stones. Nearby, a half-carved monolith shows how artisans shaped stones with concave bases to better distribute weight during tremors. Its underside smooth while its upper half remains rough-hewn. Modern seismologists have studied Tiwanaku's adaptations with awe. The irregular gaps between stones, they acted as shock absorbers, allowing walls to flex. Those oddly angled ramps leading into the sunken space, their zigzag patterns dissipated seismic energy. Even the courtyard's depth served purpose. The lower elevation reduced wind shear during storms, while the retaining walls doubled as buttresses. This wasn't just architecture, it was a dialogue with the Earth's volatility, written in stone and interrupted mid-sentence. What makes Tiwanaku's unfinished courtyard so poignant isn't just its ingenuity, but its honesty. Where completed monuments hide their struggles, these tilted walls and half-set stones lay bare the cost of survival in an unstable world. The scattered tools, the abandoned repairs, the quarried blocks that never reached their destinations. They whisper of a people who refused to surrender to the ground's caprices, even as the land itself seemed determined to swallow their efforts. In its incompleteness, the courtyard becomes something greater than a ruin, a testament to the stubborn human instinct to keep building, adapting, and repairing, no matter how often the earth shakes our foundations. Beneath the towering cliffs of Ethiopia's highlands, the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela hide a secret, a labyrinth of tunnels that twist and turn before ending abruptly in darkness. These aren't mere passageways between sanctuaries, they're the skeletal remains of an ambitious vision to carve an entire subterranean Jerusalem from the living rock. Walk these silent corridors today, and you'll stumble upon staircases leading to solid walls, arched portals opening into cliff faces, and drainage channels that dead end without reaching the surface. The scale of what was attempted here dwarfs even the famous above-ground churches, a sprawling underground complex meant to mirror the sacred geography of the Holy Land, left frozen mid-creation. Local priests recount an ethereal explanation. Angels intervene to stop the construction, leaving tools embedded in the rock as divine proof. But archaeologists trace a more earthly story in the stone itself. The unfinished tunnels reveal at least 3 distinct phases of work, each with different tool marks and directional shifts. Early passages show precise, methodical carving, likely from King Lalibela's 12th century Golden Age, when skilled artisans worked under royal patronage. Later sections become erratic, their walls gouged rather than sculpted, suggesting a workforce diminished by political turmoil, the most telling evidence. Several tunnels were backfilled deliberately, their entrances sealed with rubble matching nearby palace walls, a clear sign someone tried to hide these failed ambitions from history. What makes Lalibela's underground network extraordinary is how it preserves the decision-making process of ancient engineers. In one tunnel, you can see where workers hit a layer of brittle basalt and pivoted mid-dig. The ceiling abruptly changes angle to avoid the unstable rock. Another passage ends at a natural spring, its walls reinforced with arches that were never completed, hinting at plans for an underground baptistery. Most haunting are the practice portals, small, perfectly carved doorways leading nowhere, likely tests for techniques before applying them to major chambers. These weren't mistakes, they were calculated experiments in subterranean architecture. The political context adds layers of intrigue. When Lalibela's dynasty fell in the 13th century, rival factions had no interest in completing his sacred city. Excavations have found tools stockpiled near abandoned workfaces, their wooden handles long rotted but metal heads still sharp, proof the stoppage was sudden and unplanned. Some tunnels contain makeshift kitchens with charred hearths, suggesting workers sheltered underground during conflicts before fleeing. The backfilled passages may have been an attempt to protect the sacred site's integrity, burying its incomplete state like a shameful secret. Yet in their incompleteness, these tunnels offer something the finished churches can't: a raw look at the spiritual aspirations that drove the project. The alignment of certain dead-end passages mirrors the path of Christ's procession in Jerusalem's Via Dolorosa. One mysterious chamber, its ceiling half-carved, contains a solitary pillar inscribed with a line from the Book of Revelation about the New Jerusalem. These fragments suggest the underground network wasn't just practical infrastructure, but a three-dimensional pilgrimage route meant to transport the faithful across continents through sheer architectural mimicry. Modern laser scans reveal even grander unrealized plans: a massive circular chamber beneath St. George's Church that would have connected multiple tunnel systems, possibly intended as an underground congregational space. Its abandoned arches and pillars, some still bearing masons' marks in ancient Jez script, look like a ghostly blueprint hovering between imagination and reality. The scale is staggering. Had it been completed, Lalibela's subterranean layer could have rivaled the catacombs of Rome in complexity. What resonates most is how these silent tunnels embody a universal human tension between vision and compromise, sacred ambition and temporal limits. The finished churches above ground shine as UNESCO treasures, their crosses catching the highland sun. But below, in the cool darkness of the abandoned tunnels, we meet the Lalibela that could have been, a dream too vast even for angels to complete, its whispers echoing through uncarved rock, waiting for hands that never returned. These unfinished monuments form a global archive of human ambition, each cracked obelisk and half-carved wall, whispering the same eternal struggle between what we dream and what we can actually achieve. From the desert sands of Egypt to the jungles of Cambodia, ancient engineers grappled with problems that would feel eerily familiar to today's architects: budgets evaporating mid-project, materials failing under stress, political upheavals derailing decades of labor. The pyramid of Neferfer's sudden abandonment after a pharaoh's death mirrors modern stadiums stalled when mayors lose elections. The Mingun Potadorgi's interrupted brickwork parallel skyscrapers halted by economic crashes. Time and again, these structures prove that no empire, no matter how mighty, is immune to the collision of grand visions and hard limits. Yet within these pauses lies their greatest value. A finished temple hides its scars, the trial and error, the mid-course corrections, but an abandoned project is an open textbook. The unfinished obelisk of Aswan shows us ancient stoneworkers' exact methods for extracting granite, down to the angle of their chisel strikes. Tiwanaku's sunken courtyard reveals earthquake-proofing techniques so advanced they're still studied by seismic engineers today. Even the Parthenon's blank metopes, left uncarved during wartime, teach us about the social costs of conflict, how creativity withers when survival takes priority. These sites don't just showcase engineering, they preserve the messy, human moments when plans met reality. What's most striking is how often these ancient builders anticipated modern principles. The Romans' adaptive redesign of the Segovia aqueduct when their initial surveys failed mirrors today's iterative design processes. The Zapotec astronomers at Monte Albon, who dismantled and rebuilt their observatory to track celestial shifts, were practicing a form of agile development millennia before the term existed. Even the concept of modular construction appears in Lalibella's tunnels, where standardized doorways and arches suggest prefabrication techniques. These weren't primitive attempts, they were sophisticated solutions constrained by their era's technology, not their creators' intellect. The environmental lessons cut deepest. Mohenjo-Daro's abandoned wells and the Mocha's flood damaged Huaka del Sol stand as stark warnings about civilizations outpacing their resources. Modern engineers analyzing these sites have found chilling parallels: ancient water tables declining at rates similar to California's current crises, adobe structures crumbling under rainfall patterns that mirror today's climate shifts. These ruins force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Our ancestors weren't less intelligent about sustainability. They were just as capable of ignoring ecological limits when short-term pressures mounted. Perhaps the most humbling revelation is how these projects humanize their builders. The scribbled complaints in Hatshepsut's quarry, the strike records from Persepolis, the child-sized handprints in Chand Baori's bricks. They remind us that these wonders weren't conjured by gods or slaves, but by ordinary people with blistered hands and empty stomachs. Their unfinished works aren't testaments to failure, but to perseverance. When funding vanished or invaders came, they didn't just walk away. They hid sacred stones like at Olante Tambo, or sealed tunnels like at Lalibela, leaving clues for futures they'd never see. In the end, what unites these 26 sites isn't their incompleteness, but their honesty. They refuse to let us romanticize the past as some golden age of flawless achievement. Instead, they show us history as it really was: a relentless series of problems met with ingenuity, desperation, and sometimes surrender. The cracks in the obelisks, the walls that end mid-course, the blueprints scratched onto quarry walls, they're not signs of weakness. They're proof that every civilization, no matter how brilliant, has always danced on the edge of its capabilities, and that's a lesson as vital today as it was thousands of years ago. From cracked obelisks to buried temples, these unfinished structures are more than ruins. They're windows into the problem-solving minds of ancient engineers. Each chisel mark and abandoned blueprint tells a story of creativity, adaptation, and sometimes surrender. Standing before these monuments, we aren't just looking at failure, we're witnessing the raw, unfiltered process of human ingenuity. The pyramid of Neferfer's hurried burial chamber, the Mingun Potadorgi's earthquake-cracked bricks, the Leshan Buddha's hidden tunnels, they all whisper the same truth. Greatness isn't about perfection, but perseverance in the face of the impossible. Think about what these sites reveal. The unfinished obelisk of Aswan shows us the moment ancient engineers pushed granite to its breaking point, literally. The abandoned quarries of Baalbek force us to reckon with how workers even conceived of moving 1,000-ton stones without modern machinery, and the blank walls of Angkor Wat. They're not just empty spaces, they're invitations to imagine the stories that might have been told if time or turmoil hadn't intervened. These structures don't just belong to the past, they challenge us in the present. How many of our own skyscrapers and bridges will stand unfinished 1,000 years from now? What will their steel skeletons say about our ambitions and our limits? There's humility in these ruins, too. The Zapotec astronomers at Monte Albon, who dismantled their own observatory to realign it with the stars, remind us that progress isn't linear. Sometimes you have to tear down to rebuild better. The Inca stonemasons at Olante Tambo, hiding sacred stones from invaders, teach us that preservation can be its own form of defiance. Even the workers' graffiti in Hatshepsut's quarry, complaining of heat and hunger, humanizes these projects in ways no polished monument ever could. These aren't just engineering lessons, they're timeless truths about the cost of ambition and the resilience of ordinary people. What's perhaps most striking is how these ancient builders continue to inspire modern innovation. Seismic engineers study Tiwanaku's flexible walls for earthquake-proof designs. Hydrologists examine Mohenjo-Daro's wells to understand sustainable water management. Even the Sagrada Familia's architects look to Gaudí's original models. Much like their ancient counterparts relied on predecessor blueprints. The past isn't dead, it's a living laboratory, its unfinished experiments still yielding breakthroughs today. So the next time you see a construction site stalled or a project delayed, don't just see frustration, see history in the making. Every crane left idle, every blueprint revised, every material shortage overcome is part of the same eternal dance between vision and reality that the ancients faced. Their unfinished masterpieces ask us, what will we build, what will we leave behind, and most importantly, what will our abandoned dreams teach those who come after us? If you've ever stood in the shadow of an ancient wonder, finished or not, tell us about it below. What whispered secrets did you hear in the stone? And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into history's most fascinating puzzles. After all, the best stories aren't just about what was completed, they're about what was left beautifully, tragically, revealingly